Welcome everyone. Today we are discussing the regulations and laws surrounding e-commerce. In our today's session, we will cover a few important issues in relation to e-commerce space, starting with FDI. We will also cover payment aggregator impact on new regulations on e-commerce. We will cover food and safety law, consumer protection, and other allied laws which affects e-commerce. We will cover privacy data protection, and we will cover a little bit on tax. So the whole idea is to give an overview of different issues which are focusing on e-commerce. If you really look at e-commerce, history, especially from FDI perspective, the whole e-commerce boom started in 99-2000. First started in 99-2000 when the dot-com boom had come. The first dot-com boom had come, and a lot of companies and a lot of dot-com companies at that point of time, as they were called, as startups companies, and then they started actually trying to sell products to people. And one of the earliest company I remember, which got set up, was Bazi.com, which was an auction site, and which later we helped eBay acquire them. And that was the first company which we saw was doing e-commerce activities. The law started to evolve from that perspective, and when the dot-com boom started, under the old brick and mortar situation, the law was very clear. They permitted wholesale cash and carry, but retail trading was prohibited. Even at that point of time, when I say it was prohibited versus permitted, a lot of things were requiring government approval. So a lot of things were not on automatic basis, but generally what we saw was wholesale cash and carry was something which government had no problem with, while retail trading was something which government always had a problem with. So that was on a prohibited list. Then government tried to actually imprint the digital aspect on the retail aspect. So they said, okay, since wholesale cash and carry is permitted, we are going to permit B2B trading, but we will not permit B2C trading. So that's how the law evolved on where B2C was prohibited while B2B was permitted. Of course, there was always a question on what is B2C and whether it covers services or not. And thankfully, at that point of time, the government's view was, when they talk about B2C, it was more to do with trading, which mimicked retail trading. But as I said, Bazi.com, which was an auction site, was not considered as a B2C trading or e-commerce or retail trading. It was considered to be more of a technology platform. And since it was a technology platform, they had actually gone to FIPB for approval for FDI, and FIPB had actually given the approval. So that was the first time where we have seen government expressly approving a foreign investment in an auction site, which basically was the initial form of marketplace. B2B, as we said, was already permitted. So what we ended up seeing in terms of how the e-commerce structures evolved, ended up being where e-commerce companies said that, okay, I can do marketplace, and I can do wholesale cash and carry. So I will have FDI in entities which are doing this particular two activities, since government actually expressly permits it in one situation, which is wholesale cash and carry. In other marketplace situation, while we did not have a specific entry, there was a precedent where government had actually approved. So the view was that it did not fall into the prohibited list, and hence it was in permitted list. So this is how the structures evolved, where e-commerce companies focus themselves or morph themselves into a marketplace. And once they started getting into marketplace, I remember there was a situation where a company actually approached, or investor actually approached FIPB for approval uh, in a marketplace, and government started looking at it. They took a long time uh, before they got an approval, and this was around 2012, 2013, and that's when government learned quite a bit about how the marketplace works. And sometime later, when government started looking at the working of marketplace, they actually came up with regulations expressly permitting FDI in marketplace, but with all the different caveats. And that was further amended in 2018, 19, which currently now regulates the e-commerce. So this is basically the kind of little short history of how FDI and e-commerce specifically evolved. With this, let me go to Huzefa and ask Huzefa on what is the latest thing, especially after the non-debt rules have come in. What is the FDI investment regulations in an e-commerce space?
Thank you, thank you, Vaibhav, for giving this historic perspective, and how the entire market seems to have evolved, including the regulatory framework. Now, more interestingly, over the past 5 to 7 months, the regulatory framework has evolved even more, as most of audiences may be aware. Last year, around October 17, 2019, is when the non-debt rules were introduced. And with the introduction of the non-debt rules, it superseded TISPRO. And most of these provisions, which Vaibhav mentioned from a marketplace do's and don'ts and compliances, were initially part of a FDI policy. Then there were some subsequent press notes, the most famous press note of December 2018, which was also called Press Note 2, which obviously got married into TISPRO. But now the non-debt rules have actually superseded all of this. Now, more interestingly, has there been any significant change in terms of the regulatory landscape from a marketplace perspective is what we need to see. Now, typically, what is a marketplace, right? The definition has been there. I'll not spend too much time on it. Marketplace is nothing but an IT platform provided by an e-commerce entity to facilitate e-commerce between buyers and sellers over a digital network. What the law says is that in such a marketplace, 100% FDI is permitted. Now, the key definition out here is it uses the word e-commerce company. Now, if you see the historic landscape, which has always been there in TISPRO prior to the non-debt rules coming in October 2019, the definition of e-commerce entity was a company under a Companies Act, which is Companies Act of 56 or 2013, but it also included a foreign company or an agent or an agency or a branch office which is controlled by a person resident outside India. Now, there was a lot of ambiguity which was there over a period of time, that how can a foreign company get covered from a FDI perspective, because the foreign company would not be getting any FDI. And for the definition of foreign company, it was mapped under the Companies Act, which basically says that a foreign company should have a place in India physically or electronically and conducts any business. So there was always this gray area whereby a foreign e-commerce company or a marketplace which is selling in India doesn't have a presence, may have some sort of multiple servers and some amount of intangible infrastructure, whether it got covered under these marketplace rules. But that position now has been settled under the non-debt rules, where it clearly says that an e-commerce entity is only a company incorporated in India under the Companies Act of 1956 or 2013. So that is one big clarification which has come in. I think the second more important thing is that, has there been any change in do's and don'ts of a marketplace? As I mentioned, that yes, 100% FDI allowed in a marketplace model. However, if the marketplace is undertaking inventory business, then FDI is not permitted. Now, the key is that what is inventory business? What the law previously said, that if a marketplace is controlling the inventory or owning the inventory, then FDI would not be permissible. However, the non-debt rules make an interesting change. Now, whether it is an inadvertent error or whether it is intentional, needs to be clarified, whereby the change when it comes to inventory model is only now linked to ownership. The control test has been diluted away. In some form, it does not form part of the particular legal language in as part of the non-debt rules. So interestingly, what could happen now that a e-com marketplace today can receive FDI to the extent it is not owning inventory but controlling inventory. And the controlling test has also continued. It basically says what is control? Control is whereby a particular vendor is purchasing up to 25% and more, not up to, sorry, is purchasing 25% and more of its purchases from an e-commerce company or group companies. So that is whereby somewhere, if that happens, the e-com entity is said to have control over the vendor. Now that was a restriction which was specifically there from an inventory perspective, which has kind of diluted away under the non-debt rules. There are a couple of other points which are also there, which have historically been there. I don't think we need to get into those sort of things. But one last point which I want to comment specifically from a restriction perspective on a marketplace, the point was there were certain restrictions which was there on a vendor to go and sell onto a marketplace. Now, what were those restrictions? The restriction was that if there is an investment by the marketplace in a vendor entity or an investment by a group company of a marketplace in the vendor entity, then the vendor would not be selling on the marketplace. Now, this also extended to if the marketplace or the group companies of the marketplace exercise control over the inventories. And group company threshold was 26% and above from a shareholding perspective, and board control over majority board control. The interesting bit on this one, and this is the same position under the non-debt rules and the earlier TISPRO which was there, is that how do you determine group company test? Now there are a lot of models where there's a portfolio investment which is undertaken by the marketplace's affiliate, say in an Indian company, it is just 10%, and that Indian company subsequently goes and invests 90% in a vendor. Though the ultimate control of that particular vendor is by the Indian company, but would that be permissible? Ideally, yes, because there is no control, but there have been some interpretations whereby people have said directly, indirectly has not been clarified. So these are some of the issues which I thought were worth highlighting, specifically from a marketplace perspective, and more importantly, with the introduction of the non-debt rules. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, Zephyr. Just to remind the participants, you can ask question using the chat option. I recommend that you ask question throughout the session. Earlier we received the questions, better we'll be in a position to answer them. If we receive questions a little at the end of the session, we may not be able to answer them. We may not get enough time to answer. So please make sure if you have any questions, you send it during the sessions so that we can address it as early as possible. With this, let me move on. Huzefa, thank you for giving us kind of a brief overview on the current FDI regulations with respect to e-commerce. Maybe I want to just go to Gauri and talk about service sector. As I was saying earlier, when they talked about B2C investment, right? They only were talking about B2C trading in goods. The services aspects were not considered to be in B2C. It was considered to be services, which were there were no restriction on any FDI in that particular investment. However, when the marketplace regulations came, they specifically talked about marketplace, including not just goods but also services, which is the first time we have seen any restrictions or any regulations being brought in a services category broadly, which was not regulated earlier. So Gauri, can you tell what is the regulations on the e-commerce marketplace for services? Can you just touch upon some of those impact?
So, as you rightly said, the genesis of this entire regulation, retail and services was always open. And in fact, even today, if you see the non-debt rules, there is a specific provision which says that, which is 1524, sale of services through e-commerce shall be under automatic route. So that means and says subject to sector specific conditions. Now, if you see the definition of the term e-commerce, just stay with me on these definitions because this is important. The e-commerce definition says means buying and selling of goods and services, including digital products, etc. On the electronic network.
Sorry, Gauri, can you put your
Yeah.
mic closer? Voice
Yeah,
was
is
much
this better? Yeah,
Much
is
better.
this better? Yeah, okay. So just to go back to the definition of e-commerce, it discusses buying and selling of services as well through the e-commerce mode. Now, if we see this together, I'll come to marketplace in a bit, but suppose I'm an entity which is providing services online to third parties. There is no restriction on me to do so. Plus, I don't have any further restrictions that I can see under the under the non-debt rules, except probably there may be certain sectoral issues. But if you are talking about purely say IT services and all those other services such as content services, there aren't any specific restrictions on that as a delivery point. But interestingly, I believe whether it was a drafting error, was it intentional, unintentional, only whoever is the draftsman can tell us that. But when they came to the definition of marketplace and then the restrictions on marketplace, unfortunately, they have included for the marketplace. So let us understand that when I'm providing service on my own, I'm completely open, no restrictions, anything. But the moment I go on a marketplace, suddenly the marketplace now is controlled through through these regulations, which is little, I find this little odd. But anyway, so there are the restrictions that come in, unfortunately, is the control on the pricing, the manner in which, I'm completely okay when it comes to transparency related provisions. For example, there are certain provisions which require the details of the sellers to be provided on the marketplace, so which is more from a consumer protection perspective if there are transparency provisions. But there are provisions also on the marketplaces which require the marketplaces not to interfere with the pricing. Now this entire thing on pricing, if we can take a step back, was because it was observed probably that the marketplaces, when they were not allowed to do retail trading, there was an apprehension that they are somewhere controlling the entire manner in which the goods are being sold, and therefore certain restrictions should be imposed, but the same should not have been imposed on the services. But today there are these restrictions where they say that the marketplace will not directly or indirectly influence the price. Then the marketplaces basically are not sort of allowed to have that control that Huzefa mentioned. So I'll not go so much into detail at this stage, but when we come to the consumer protection also, that is the time I'll take more time on this. But the short point is, unfortunately, there are these specific restrictions on the services part also on the marketplace. Vaibhav, if you want to add anything specific.
Yeah, so thanks, Gauri. So as Gauri mentioned, right, the whole concept of marketplace came because there was a restriction on doing retail trading, right? So they say, okay, you can't do retail trading, but we will permit you to do marketplace provided you follow certain conditions, right? Which means that you will not use marketplace by indirectly doing retail trading, right? That was the whole objective. But on services, it was always permitted. And hence, having a restriction on marketplace for services actually is really speaking a very counterintuitive, right? That while you can do services, but if you end up facilitating services, you have restriction, right? So it in my mind, this is something which should not have been brought in, but in first place. But since they have brought in, this is something which we need to follow. What kind of things we see in this again is situations where what happens if I am providing services, but I'm providing part of the services, and I'm actually combining other services in order to provide full services to customer, and if I am using e-commerce platform for doing it, then will I get covered, right? In a sense that, look, it is not that my job is to just do marketplace, but marketplace is one of the way where I collate different services, and I also provide one part of services, and I provide services to customer. Will I get covered? So there are so many such situations where a lot of things are covered unintentionally. Whether you take some of the industry like food delivery, for example, right? Or similar services industry where the whole focus is not to do any sale of goods and retail trading, but to provide services to get certain things delivered. So that's where a lot of these questions come in, and we see unintended issues coming in. Having said it, let me also address one of the new things which have come in on from FDI perspective before we move to non-FDI situation. If you see one of the latest regulations which have come in, basically says that if any investment comes from either a citizen or a person resident, or even a company which is based in countries which are surrounding with the land bordering India, then that requires government approval. Now, obviously, there were restrictions amongst countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, and Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar are not the countries where you see a lot of investment coming in. So one of the key areas, or the key countries which got caught into this, and is China. And then the question really is that what is the impact on e-commerce industry in this particular space because of this regulation, right? Now, if you really look at it, when you consider this particular regulation covering China, what it means is that if you are getting investment from Chinese companies, then you need to go to government for approval. So if companies like Alibaba or Tencent, they are making an investment, then you need to go and get approval of the government. But there are a lot of questions which come in, because what the regulations say is not just direct investment, but even if the beneficial ownership is held by Chinese citizen or so not just Chinese, but the countries bordering, having common land border with India, then those countries will need to go and get approval of government, right? So it's just not the direct investment, but also indirect investment, where the beneficial ownership is with some of these people. Now, when you look at investment from countries which do not share border but have investment from countries which shares border, right? So just take China as an example. Let's say if a company is investing from Singapore but has Chinese investment in Singapore company, then whether it's considered to be indirect ownership, whether it is covered because there's a beneficial ownership of by a Chinese company which borders, which has a common land border, right? So that question comes up. So if you really want to address that, you will need to go and look at what is the meaning of beneficial ownership. In certain situations, it is very clear, because if you had a Chinese company which directly invested in India and then you required approval, if they set up a Singapore company or a Cayman company or a US company and then invest in India, then again the approach should be required, right? So that's something which is very easy and very simple to understand, right? That covers beneficial ownership. But then there are a lot of situations, today if you see, there are Walmart and Amazons, right, which are not Chinese companies. But what if, and they are listed entities, right? What if there are some ownership, some of the shares are owned by Chinese national, right? In that situation, will the beneficial ownership cover or not cover, right? Ideally, it should not cover. I don't think that's the intention, but there is lack of clarification on what is the definition of beneficial ownership. There can be multiple interpretation, right from a very conservative interpretation where even a single share owned in a company outside India, which is investing in India by a Chinese national, will get covered. In my mind, this is very difficult and unlikely interpretation of what beneficial ownership is, to something where it goes to say that only if that company, which is a foreign company which is investing in India, is controlled or majority owned by Chinese, then only it can be covered, right? Or something in between, right? So that is the issue which comes up when you are looking at e-commerce industry, and when you are looking at e-commerce industry has significant FDI investment coming from companies which are non-Chinese companies, but in which case there may be indirect Chinese ownership, right? And I'm giving China just an example because that is most likely country which will get affected in this. Second issue which comes up in this particular sector is this sector also has a lot of private equity investments coming in, right? And a lot of private equity investment, the GPs are based in Hong Kong. So the next question is, would Hong Kong be covered or not, right? Because is Hong Kong a separate entity, separate country, and not bordering any land with India and hence not covered, or because it's part of China, is controlled by China, it is also covered? Now again, there is lack of clarity there. There are two levels of thoughts there, and unless we get more clarity, it will just be interpretation or speculation which one will do to take a call on whether Hong Kong is covered or not, right? So both on definition of what exactly is beneficial ownership, and secondly whether Hong Kong is covered or not, is currently open for interpretation, and hoping that India government will bring clarity. But in absence of clarity, we will need to take a call on how we're going to define it and how that is going to decide on the approval in FDI in e-commerce industry. I think with this we will kind of move on from FDI perspective to non-FDI perspective. Let me go back to Gauri. Gauri, can you tell on terms of any legislation or proposed legislation with respect to consumer protection, which is something which is going to affect the e-commerce space?
Sure. So, as people will be aware that in 2019, we had a new Consumer Protection Act. The earlier act was of 1986. One of the sections, which is section 94, specifically empowers the consumer authority to come out with the rules which are specific to e-commerce. And if we see the entire construct of the act, the prior act and the present act, there is clearly new provisions that have been added in terms of the definitions, where they distinguish between the sellers versus the electronic platforms, the same construct as marketplace but defined slightly differently. So there was clearly a mindset to bring in some of these transactions clearly within the ambit of Consumer Protection Act. Whether they were not included before, I don't believe so. All these transactions were clearly included in the earlier act, but probably here the government wanted to sort of go out and explain it further. So one interesting development under that is that they have also tried to bring in draft rules under the Consumer Protection Act, which are available on the Consumer Affairs Ministry website if somebody wants to go and look at them. And unfortunately, the draft rules are quite confusing in 2-3 different perspectives. Number one is that they do recognize the distinction between the inventory based entities and marketplace based entities, but in terms of obligations, there is a lot of confusion of overlapping obligations. In fact, we as a firm also have given our recommendations to the ministry in terms of all this confusion. The second thing that they also specifically call out is what are the other legislations such as Legal Metrology Act, in terms of data protection rules under the IT Act. So they are specifically call out what are the other legal provisions that need to be complied with by these e-commerce entities. Again, I don't believe that is specifically required to be called out, but they have specifically done so. But some of the key provisions under that are relating to transparency. Now, this is more important than anything else in my mind, because they basically want, names of the sellers to be spelled out on the marketplaces, the details of names, addresses, and all that. So one perspective is to say that, okay, this is required if the consumer has any grievance. But when we were looking at industry feedback, the concern that the industry had in relation to this was, this is their, trade secret or confidential information for the marketplaces, and they don't necessarily want to sort of spell it out in the open. The other thing is they want transparency in terms of the terms of service, the return policy, uh, the timeline within which the refund has to be provided. Now, all these appear, at least the refund policy appears quite onerous, because you don't really see similar provisions applicable to the brick and mortar, shops. So somewhere they have gone somewhat aggressive in terms of some of these provisions. They also bring out the pricing policy, the warranties, uh, health warnings that require to be provided. So some of these are quite laudable provisions from a transparency perspective, as I said. Uh, Now they also bring about a concept of not influencing prices of goods. So you can see some overlap with the FDI policy. Now this is very interesting, because if you really see from an FDI policy perspective, or the non-debt rules, those are applicable only to the entities where there is an FDI, not for the other entities, right, which are non-FDI entities. But some of these rules under the Consumer Protection Act do not necessarily make that distinction. So that way, in a way, it is good if it is bringing at least level playing field. But again, there is no consistency necessarily of the provisions. They also talk about, to some extent, advertising related, disclosures. They also, the main act, actually, the Consumer Protection Act, and this is something the e-commerce company should be concerned about, are two specific provisions under the act, main act now, is there is a concept of, unfair contract, and the definition is pretty wide. So when you have standard terms and conditions on your platform, including, in terms of return policy and all of that, wherever they feel that these are unfair terms, there may be some implication coming under the Consumer Protection Act. The second issue I see, and not many people may have realized this, is the definition of a product seller is pretty wide. And this becomes very relevant because quite a few e-commerce marketplaces we see not necessarily simply connecting the buyers and sellers, but they go beyond and provide additional services which are also, in a FDI context, permissible also under the non-debt rules, because they can provide additional services of delivery, transport, and all of that. But if they, because of those additional services, if they are viewed as product seller, then the product liability also gets attached if there is something that goes wrong in the product liability. So I think some of these aspects, and Vaibhav, feel free to stop me when you believe I need to stop. But just one other aspect in terms of food. Now, we have a separate law called Food Safety and Standards Act, and under that act, interestingly, back in 2017, some rules were framed which also make distinction between the inventory based and the marketplace. And there are certain registration requirements, and again, those rules are drafted quite in a vague manner, but it is important to look at those rules and see your business model and figure out whether you get, if you're a food delivery service business, or even for that matter, if you are a food, if you're allowing the sale and distribution of food on your platform, then these rules may get triggered, which also include hygiene related provisions, which you need to get compliance with, etc., etc. So some of these things get triggered, and all the other laws, in my mind, which apply in a brick and mortar situation, such as Legal Metrology Act, which I mentioned, the labeling requirements under that, any pharma related specific product. Now that is the other last point I will make here, is the e-pharmacy. Now again, there have been litigations in Delhi as well as Chennai on this, and there is a lot of confusion whether e-pharmacies can operate, and if so, under what conditions. And the government is also looking at bringing around the separate rules for e-pharmacies. So what you need to look at is a horizontal law, which is consumer protection, FDI, and all of that, and the vertical law, which applies to the specific, sort of product that you're dealing with, and then look at an overall compliance that that needs to be put in place, including appropriate terms and conditions and disclaimers on the platform.
Thank you, Gauri. I think, as you rightly said, some of the FDI restrictions which were brought in, right, only apply to e-commerce companies which have FDI. Now, the whole objective of that really was to ensure that they don't go and do retail trading, which was not permitted for companies which has FDI, right? But uh, if you don't have an FDI, then there is no restriction because you can actually do retail trading. Now, having said it, some of the clauses of being, let's say, fair and transparent and things like that also should have been applicable to non-FDI, because that's also important protection from consumer perspective, which is given to which is relevant to any marketplace, not just a marketplace which has an FDI. So I think it's in right direction in some of those thought process which are going on, especially keeping in mind that now we are going to see a lot of new Indian e-commerce companies which are coming up, right? Whether it's Reliance and some of the other ones which are coming up. But with this, let us go to Huzefa. Huzefa, specifically new payment aggregator rules come in, and this has a significant impact on e-commerce industry. Can you touch upon the rules and the impact on e-commerce industry?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Vaibhav. But just before I move, I think one very critical point which Gauri very briefly touched about is that the draft consumer protection rules have essentially mirrored the definitions of e-commerce entity, marketplaces, and so forth and so on, which was there under the regime prior to the non-debt rules coming in. So the definition of e-commerce company under the draft consumer protection rules again includes a foreign company. So now this is again a very important and critical point, because if the consumer protection rules in its current form become enforceable, so a foreign website or a foreign company offering e-com services to Indian customers and fulfilling the definition of foreign company under the Companies Act, if it gets triggered under these rules, one of the immediate compliances which they need to fulfill is actually get registered and incorporated in India. Now that is a big shift, from a business model perspective. I just thought, we should just further elaborate on that. The second point, Weber, which you mentioned, is that there are these new payment aggregator guidelines which have come in. The guidelines were actually announced just a month ago, sometime in March, which have got effective as of April 1st, 2020 in the lockdown. Now, as most of us are aware, most e-commerce companies, facilitated payments either directly by themselves, or they went and hired third-party, fintech companies and payment aggregators / payment gateways. Now, for all these years, over the payment aggregators and payment gateways were essentially regulated under an intermediary law, which was the 2009 Intermediary Payment Guideline, which essentially said that if anybody is facilitating payments between a buyer and a seller, which is an intermediary, there were certain do's and don'ts and certain compliances. It was not a licensing model, but it was just certain compliances which you needed to fulfill. Essentially, one of the key compliances was you should not touch the funds. The money should be with in a bank called a nodal account. But that has significantly changed with the introduction of these payment aggregator guidelines. Essentially, it has moved to a licensing regime. So today, if anybody is providing payment aggregation services, which is nothing but providing an ecosystem where you're facilitating buying and selling, whereby the merchant doesn't need to have a separate payment infrastructure, then you broadly get categorized as a payment aggregator, simpliciter, we'll call it PA. Now, a lot of e-commerce companies today have their own payment aggregator infrastructure, because essentially it was not a licensed regime. They used to partner with banks, develop their own fintech platform, and they would ride upon it. Now the whole premise has changed because of these guidelines being effective, because it's moved to a licensing regime, which essentially says that if e-com companies want to continue providing payment aggregator services, for themselves or for third parties, then they would need to have they need to demarcate or separate out this business from their main e-commerce business. The deadline for that is up to June 30th, 2021. So yes, there is some time, But the whole thing is that e-com companies may need to relook at structuring themselves, because within these guidelines, one, of course, you need a license, then there are some minimum net worth requirements, and more than that, there are few onerous compliances when it comes from a safety and security perspective. In fact, if the e-commerce company is willing to do something like that, they would also, up from a security and safety perspective, the guidelines stipulate that they would need to actually undertake background checks with the merchants to ensure that they are not selling fake and counterfeit products. In addition, then there has to be certain annual audits which need to be undertaken. Compliance certificates would need to be undertaken. So the short point to summarize on this one is that if an e-com company wants to become a payment aggregator for itself or others, the model has changed. In the past regime, they were not regulated, they were regulated but not licensed. Going forward, they would need to undertake a license and ensure that they actually structure it well, because there will be e-com marketplace compliances also which need to be undertaken, yearly compliances under the non-debt rules. Time permitting, Vaibhav, can I just quickly touch upon a few points from a PDP bill perspective? I think
Why
some of
don't you
our
do
audience.
that? Yes, I think Mala has asked this question specifically, so we will also address her question. Please go ahead.
Sure. So now, of course, with the PDP bill coming in, right now, means we've had sessions and currently it's not enforced. Hopefully it should become law sooner than later. But assuming the PDP bill gets enforced in its current form, right, apart from the compliances which need to be undertaken specifically from a company or e-commerce company which is collecting, processing personal data or sensitive personal data, that is one side. There are various onerous compliances, even if you're today collecting just your name, address, and phone number. But having said that, what is critical from an e-commerce company perspective, right? I think the first point here is that most e-commerce companies mine a lot of data. They get basic data of the users. They have data sets, they mine it, they do predictive analysis, they do smart analysis. There's some sort of machine learning which is added into all of this. So one of the rights of the data subject under the PDP bill, under section 19 of the PDP bill, is right to portability. So what does it, in summary say? So if a user is giving its data, like say, phone number, address, or basis that, the e-com company is identifying user preferences, user habits, or further analyzes that sort of data, any sort of data which is evolved by the e-commerce company using the user data, the user will have the right to ask for that data at any point in time. But more importantly, the user will also have the right to ask the e-com company to transfer the data to a third party. Now this becomes very interesting, because the user data, for a moment, let's assume it is base data, and the e-com company analyzes it, mines it, makes it smart, but the user will have the right to port it. It's called portability of data to a third party. Now, of course, technology interfaces, how it will work is one thing. And the second part is vis-a-vis ownership, right? Who owns the data? Because typically the e-com company may want to own it because it's mined it and it's analyzed it. So that's one issue. Couple of two very quick points on this. From a compliance perspective, there is also a concept of SDF under section 26 of the proposed PDP bill, which is nothing but a significant data fiduciary, whereby, considering the quantum of data some companies may actually handle, the government may actually classify certain companies as SDFs. And if a marketplace or e-com company gets categorized as an SDF, considering the amount of data it's handling, there are more and more additional compliances, such as having a data protection impact assessment, periodic audits, so forth and so on. And last but not the least, I'll just touch upon transfer of sensitive personal data, right? A lot of e-commerce companies have basic payment data. So today, when you're going and shopping on some sites, the basic credit card information is saved. So you can, while checking out, you just, say, this is your card, you put in your OTP, which is going forward, but the basic credit card information is saved. Now, whether that is saved with the payment aggregator gateway or the e-commerce company is a separate discussion. But let's for a moment assume that it is saved by the e-com company. Now, if the e-com company is saving financial information such as basic credit card details, that amounts to sensitive personal data within the law. And again, there are additional compliances when it comes to sensitive personal data, and specifically limitations in terms of transferring it if there is some amount of processing happening cross border. So these are some of the nuances and compliances which need to be factored in. Over to you, Weber.
Thank you, Josefa. So, as Josefa mentioned, there are a lot of privacy implications on e-commerce industry, and specifically on porting requirement. There have been a lot of concerns which industry has shown. Though there is one out and a couple of outs which are there, and one of the outs is that they transfer the data unless it includes your trade secrets. So if you're transferring data of consumer and that includes your trade secrets because you've done certain analysis, then that could be an out for transferring those kind of data. So there are some outs, but this is something which has concerned this particular industry substantially. And on top of it, there also government is thinking, how do we regulate anonymized data? So if that happens, then right. So this sector, this is very important sector regulations from e-commerce perspective. With this, Gauri, let me come back and just see if you have anything to add on this, and if there are any other key regulations which you want to cover which impact e-commerce. Gauri?
Sure. So I think I'll do some forward-looking thing rather than what is exists today, which we have discussed before. But if you don't mind, I just have a couple of thoughts in terms of the health-related aspects which I've mentioned before, especially post-COVID. Whether now, because if you see the food safety regulations which I mentioned before very briefly, they do talk about the delivery, safe delivery and all of that, right? Today there is a lot of discussion on contactless delivery by the e-commerce companies. We saw one incident in Delhi, I believe, where one delivery boy was found to have unfortunately who was infected. Then about 72 families had to be quarantined because of that. So whether the standards will be heightened and whether newer standards for contactless delivery etc may come up is something I'm contemplating. The other aspects will be on on the overall price part, right? And I believe there was a question on that, and maybe we can spend a couple of minutes there. The entire concept of discounts, pricing, and whether competition is likely to look at it, is already getting some of the points. But whether both the regulators, whether it is under FDI and under competition law, there is something that will come up. And because of the provision, even under the Consumer Protection Act, whether and now if you really see, the difficulty will be that if people are not allowed to go to malls for a few months and the deliveries start of non-essential items as well, what is the pricing that is going to develop, and around that whether there are newer issues that are likely to come up, whether discounts will go or whether they will increase. And because of that, that is the other point I thought I will bring up. And the other aspect chain, and the going back to the earlier point about contactless delivery in terms of how the distribution chain and related regulations are likely to develop. So I think we'll just need to do some future thinking in terms of the post-COVID situation and see whether and to what extent these new things are likely to come up. But people should definitely watch out for the Consumer Protection Act related developments, because not many people have realized the impact of that. They should watch out for the local presence that Josefa mentioned. And I believe, of course, the tax point that that we will cover, but that those are the other aspects. Probably we need to keep that keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Gauri. I think we'll talk a little bit on trends a little later also if we give time. But more importantly, as you rightly said, we need to cover tax. And I think there have been questions also on tax which has come in, especially by someone has asked on tax side. So Maya, can you take this tax question up? Specifically with respect to TDS issue, right, which has been levied on e-commerce companies under 194. What is the implication on e-commerce industry. Maya?
Thanks, Vaibhav. So I think I'll be taking up that question, and I'll also talk about the equalization levy, which is another recent new tax that's been imposed in the recent Finance Act. So to start with 194.0, and I mean, both these sections could justify a separate webinar themselves. But to summarize from a high level, the 194.
You only have 4 or 5 minutes, and not more.
Yeah, so the high level points are that 194.0 comes into force later this year, and what they are targeting there is that the memorandum of statement and objects says that this is to widen and deepen the tax net, and they have imposed a TDS obligation on an e-commerce operator. Now, the obligation is with respect to any sales facilitated by the e-commerce operator from an Indian resident merchant, and 1% of the gross value of the supply facilitated has to be withheld and paid to the government. Now, one of the things that Huzefa had pointed out was that the payment aggregator rules, etc. There is a provision for the monies collected from customers for sales made has to be put into a separate account. So practically speaking, it's difficult to see how this will work from a tax perspective and how they will get the money to make the deduction and pay, because a tax deducted at source is technically a tax that is to be paid by the seller and not the e-commerce operator. But if they have to go out of pocket to try and pay the deduction at source, that can cause some cash flow issues and some concerns around that. The other thing is that the issue of consideration is something that also comes up, in the sense on what base should the 1% be deducted. Of course, in a inventory model, it's clear that it has to be on the value of the total goods or services that are supplied. But in a marketplace model, when the commission is what is earned by the e-commerce marketplace, then a deduction on the entire amount, which is how the wording seems to be reading right now, would also cause additional pain. Now, interestingly, originally when the section was passed, was proposed in the bill, it did not include e-commerce operators who did not have an obligation to make the payment to the merchant. So e-commerce operators or platform owners who did not have to pay the merchants were not included within the definition of this section. But unfortunately, when the act was finally passed, that qualification seems to have been removed. So and there is a proviso which deems that even if money doesn't actually flow through the e-commerce operator, they will nevertheless, through the deeming fiction, will be held responsible for those amounts as well, and that they'll have to do the withholding. So all of these, I think, compound the issue. Clearly, the tax and the regulators from other laws have not shared notes on this one. And it's hoped that the tax department comes out with a clarification on this. Otherwise, on practical side, it will be very difficult to comply with this. The second thing is, of course, the equalization levy. This is a 2% tax imposed on an e-commerce operator who owns or who engages in e-commerce supply, and which is defined as the online sale of goods or the online provision of services. So one of the questions that comes up, and there is no document which clarifies what is the intent of this provision from the government side yet. So we don't know what is the total scope of transactions they intended to cover. But from a plain reading of the section, it's a little unclear as to whether online sale of goods would also cover delivery of tangible goods, right? Where you have basically online orders but offline supplies. Whether that would be covered or not is an open question. Similarly, what is the tax is applicable on online provision of services. So again, when there is a online ordering of the service but offline provision, whether that is covered or not is one of the issues that can come up. The second thing is the section also applies to equalization levy, also applies to sale of goods owned by the e-commerce operator. So clearly, even in situations where we have inventory model, the equalization levy would apply because the platform is selling their own goods. Now, one of the new things where it has gone quite aggressively imposed a tax on is that if an advertisement is placed on the marketplace. Now, most of these transactions, when you take a cross-border scenario, the transactions that are being sought to tax don't involve transactions between two non-residents. Usually the sale of the good or the supply of the service is to a resident in India. Those are the transactions that are covered. But one of the limbs talks about how if advertisements are placed on the marketplace targeting Indian customers, then even if it is between two non-residents, right? Even in that case, equalization levy would apply. And it's a pretty badly worded section, but they also say that sale of data of Indian residents over a platform would also be subject to the equalization levy. Of course, I'm sure from a privacy perspective, there can be no platform which as a business model engages in the sale of data collected from people, from persons because of privacy issues. But probably what they meant was sales by the e-commerce operator using data collected from Indian residents. But again, the wording is very unclear and quite problematic. So I believe the tax department may be working on a clarification on this. If that's true, then I think we should look forward to some of these issues being sorted by them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayappan. I think this tells quite a lot with how our government works, especially two different departments not really talking to each other and coming with regulations around same time, which makes it impossible for any one of those regulation to be implemented, right? So that's very typical. With this, I think what we have tried to do is we have tried to answer all the questions while the session was on. So most of the such questions have been covered. There are one or two we may not have covered it. One of the question which we have not covered specifically is by Anshul, which says, is there a room for government to deregulate e-commerce sector considering the pandemic to push higher investment in online sale? The answer is no. I think in my view, more and more restrictions and more regulations will actually come in because this sector is likely to grow bigger. And once it grows bigger, the impact on consumers, impact on Indian economy becomes higher, so that government will now regulate more. So in fact, we would see that you expect more regulation rather than deregulations. Then there was another question with respect to single brand retail trading and multi-brand retail trading. I think as Gauri has mentioned to them that we have a book also. You can look at the non-debt rules which she has identified, but also there is a paper which we have written which it can give you a little background on retail trading. Of course, that needs to be updated, but at least some other backgrounds can be given, or we can take it offline since we don't have any time left on this, right? With this, I would like to close the session. And before I close the session, I want to thank all the participants and panelists. Thank you so much. It was wonderful having you here, and wonderful having questions from you. E-commerce has been an important sector and very complicated or regulated sector since last many years, and going in future, considering the pandemic, it will actually just grow bigger and larger. And with Reliance coming in, with Reliance Store, Jio stores, with Facebook investment in Jio, and there we are likely to see a lot of investments and a lot of activity in e-commerce space, increased activity in e-commerce space. So with this, Megha, over to you.
Just one very new update which has just come. So the Indian government, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, has actually granted 13 pilots, and 2 of them actually are for commerce, and which could include drone deliveries for e-commerce companies. So just last week, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, for the first time in India, has granted approval for 13 companies to run pilot drone projects beyond visual line of sight, and some of them actually include drone deliveries. So the good news is that with e-commerce booming, we may actually see deliveries by drones also very soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzaifa, for this piece of information.
Sorry, I know we are running out of time, but I think the panelists, just one other thing for the participants, there is an e-commerce policy in the pipeline, which you may have seen the earlier version, but I think next couple of months you will also see that policy coming out, which will further sort of take into account all the regulations that we discussed.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you, Huzefa. Thank you, Maya.